everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. I saw our Patreon subscribers yesterday for Progressive Coffee Hour, but to the rest of you, I hope you're all right. You're all right, or at least as all right as can be expected, which is probably not very all right at all. I took Friday off from YouTube and realized after the fact that I had forgotten to announce it on the YouTube channel. So I'm sorry for all of you who are wondering where I was on Friday. I really just needed to spend some time with my kids. I took them ice skating in Rockefeller Center in New York, and we kind of had a day in the city, and it was just really nice to kind of like get some relief. So all that said, it's definitely been a weekend of like big contemplation about what's coming next. And we have an awful lot to talk about today on that front, and also how we got here, because there's a lot of speculation right now running around, some of which is grounded in evidence and some of which isn't. And I'm going to repeat a couple of things that I said yesterday on our coffee hour for our Patreon people, because it's really important right now to get very clear-headed on what we need to do next. Okay, so first things first, I am ECM, it's Resistance Live. And I am today, for our visually challenged viewers, wearing a like cocoa-colored turtleneck. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I have my thick gold hoops in, and I'm in my office in front of an oak cabinet, stack of books, and a plant. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. So I want to talk just for a second about this kind of questioning that I think a lot of people have been going through about what really happened, quote unquote, in the election. And what I said to our Patreon people yesterday, please indulge me, friends, is that we have to wait for evidence of anything, right? And the other thing I'm just going to say here is that I do think there is a bit of a disinformation spiral happening right now on Threads in relation to people circulating information from a particular account that has been long known to be questionable. I also want everybody to know that there are automatic recounts in many states. Pennsylvania, for instance, does an automatic 2% recount of votes. And so for everybody who's like, why can't we have recounts? Well, you know, there's proportional recounts happening in some of these states anyhow. Okay. All this said, one of the things that we do really need to do right now is deal with reality. And the reality is that where we are right now is that it looks like Trump has won. We're heading toward an inauguration on January 20th. He's already appointing people, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today because you guys need to know what's coming. And we have a very limited window of time here to organize. And the longer that we spend in this place of, it can't possibly have been the case that this is how the election went, the less time we're spending actually organizing in our own local communities, which is really critical for survival and safety right now. So I want folks to understand that whatever may or may not have happened in the election that's hinky, and I'm actually at this point not really convinced that there is much there. I will just tell you that even with that, there are some facts that we need to kind of like look at, okay? The first is that as of right now, Kamala Harris lost by only about 2% of the votes, all right? I looked at the numbers this morning, and it is not a large number, all right? And one of the things that means, which is good for us, is that we have like 71 million people on our side, right? We're not alone. We're not without power. We're not without resources. We're not without the opportunity to throw sand in the works whenever we can, right? And one of the things that's incredibly critical right now is that you organize where you live. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I do want to point you guys to just a couple of key things based on like the how did this happen kind of question that people keep coming back to, because AOC did something very interesting on her Instagram. Very interesting and really disgusting, but also really important, okay? And what she did was she essentially asked her followers who supported her, who also voted for Trump, to explain their votes, all right? And this is one of the things that I have been thinking about, because just like many of you, I've had these questions about like, how could it possibly be the case that Democrats won the governorship in North Carolina, that Alyssa Slotkin won in Michigan, that we saw some really serious gains down ballot for Dems in some swing states. And simultaneously, Trump won the presidency, right? Like that there are legitimate questions being raised by that. Well, this is how. And I hate to put it this way, but if you go look at the screenshots that AOC has posted on her feed, you will see some very disturbing trends, okay? And those trends point directly to active disinformation campaigns with micro-targeting designed to get people to change their minds about voting for Trump versus voting for Harris on the basis of very specific issues-based disinformation, okay? Gaza is definitely a part of it, but it's not the only thing, okay? All of this, like the economy stuff that we've seen floating around, right? Active disinformation campaigns related to that, okay? Disinformation campaigns that are like everybody's the same, so why does it matter? Right? And all of this is documented in screenshots that she's reposting en masse right now. And there were people in there, because this was my immediate reaction, which is like, wow, these responses are making me really want to vomit. And AOC said, you know, but this is the point. We have to understand how this happened, right? And when you look at those responses, people who have been in full support of AOC and say, well, Trump's also a populist, right? The only way that someone could reach that conclusion as someone who has historically supported AOC is if they were being targeted by disinformation, right? Like that's somebody who's not actually probably inside the Fox News bubble, the far right-wing news bubble, but it is someone who might be getting their news from, let's just say hypothetically, TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, right? And so, you know, I just want to explain to everyone that we know that micro-targeting was used historically in 2016 to influence certain identity groups, like in relation to the first election of Trump. What seems to be the case right now is that there are people who are literally only, and a lot of them, who are literally only getting their news from algorithms that are controlled on social media, right? And this should raise a lot of really serious worries, because people who are quote unquote low information voters, right? Not people who are in the mix like we are, who are, you know, like aware of everything that's happening at every moment, essentially. I hate to put it in those terms, but it's true. In our political environment, right? People who are low information voters are getting their news from algorithms. And those algorithms can be manipulated very easily on the basis of the personal data that is acquired by the social media platform. This, by the way, is the whole way that Facebook ads work, right? You can go to Facebook and buy advertising, because we tried to do it a few years ago, like 5 years ago now, based on like where someone lives, what their identity is, what other groups they follow, what politicians they follow, whether or not they've liked a certain type of post, what their identified interests are on the basis of what the algorithm knows about them. I can tell you that you can granularly micro-target specific voting blocks based on what Facebook already knows about you, what TikTok already knows about you, what Twitter already knows about you. And that's even including, you know, the stuff that Elon Musk has done to put his thumb on the scale, okay? Like that is the most obvious explanation for how we arrived here. And I have to say that notwithstanding the fact that I've talked about my own experience, along with millions of other women, waking up in the middle of the night on Wednesday. And I got to tell you, I still think that there are stories that are going to come out that are going to help us understand how this was affected. Because by the way, it's the same thing that destroyed the original leadership of the Women's March. All that said, okay, it's the disinformation that leads people to vote in a certain way that is the most likely culprit here, okay? Not like the interference with every single state database. All right. And so I need people to be thinking about it through the lens of the fact that there may not be actual interference with the data of the election, right? But what we know there has been, because we know how, for instance, the Russians do this. There's an enormous amount of evidence of it now. What is the more likely explanation is that people's votes were manipulated by the information that they were fed. All right. And on top of that, I'm just going to point out, because it's obvious, and we spent a lot of time talking about this yesterday on the Patreon feed, that this is also completely about white supremacist patriarchy and the permission that people have been given to hate and the addiction to Donald Trump, like literally the psychological addiction to the dopamine of outrage and hate, right? Like there are numerous factors in play here, all right? But this is what I want to pull you all back to, all right? We have a very limited window of time right now to mobilize where we live for safety and security and survival, all right? Like a really limited window. And one of the things that means is that you've got to be committed right now to building community where you live, even if it's just with a tiny handful of people, right? You all know I'm like a huge follower and fundamentally student of Mariam Kaba, who's a longtime abolitionist and mobilizer, community activist, community organizer. And she had pointed out on Blue Sky, I think just yesterday, and this is really true, that 5 people coming together in a given community can make a world of difference. All right. Like you don't have to be organizing hundreds of people where you live. I mean, you can if you want. I'm kind of doing that myself, but you literally all you need is a handful of people. Okay. You need a handful of like-minded people who are committed to thinking about how to keep people alive, thinking about how to keep people safe, thinking about how to keep people fed if the supply chain goes down or they deport 11 million people and there's nobody left to pick food, for instance. Because by the way, like United Farm Workers, I mean, you all know, you should know about food production in this company and how much it relies on undocumented migrant labor. All of this from the perspective of building communities of safety is really where our focus needs to lie right now, because there is a train coming down the tracks headed for the nation. And we know what's coming, right? Like we know more and more the more we see who the appointments are going to be. All right. So I just want to take a minute here, because one of the things that happened on Friday was that we launched our new program. Okay. And I just want to take a minute to just tell you guys the title of it and what it's all about. And I will drop a link to it up here. And actually, I already have, I have a link below that you guys can just see. It's called the Dual Power Accelerator, a 10-week training for disruption, community building, solidarity, safety, and survival. There are scholarships available for people in need, full and partial. There's also a mountain of extended payment plans if you want to join us, including through places like Affirm and Klarna. All right. But this program, we spun on a dime from what we were planning on doing after the election, because what people need to learn how to do right now is build active local community and systems of dual power. If you don't know what dual power is, it's essentially a theoretical political concept about building alternative structures while other structures in the formal sense collapse. All right. So like, how can you feed people where you live, right? What are you going to do if there are elders in your community and they eliminate Social Security? How are you going to help people stay alive, right? So what we need to be focused on right now is really clear, concise community action where we live, all right? And I'm going to say one other thing about this. Like, just because they are threatening all these enormously scary things, and I'm going to talk about panic in a minute, doesn't mean that we are helpless, all right? And one of the things we have to think about here is like, how do we throw sand in the works? How do we gum things up in a way that allows for there to be major pushback against what they're trying to accomplish, all right? One of the things that we need to think about here is that disruption can be quiet, right? Disruption can be small. One of the things that I mentioned yesterday was like that family in Amsterdam that housed Anne Frank's family and their friends for years during the Holocaust, they were disrupting and no one knew who they were, right? So we're not talking about right now these things that people seem to want that are performative, right? We're not talking about mass marches because, first of all, the administration is going to ignore it. And second of all, they're going to shoot people. Like, we're really kind of like almost there. Like, I don't really have any doubts about it after what they threatened to do during the Black Lives Matter protests after George Floyd's murder. Okay. So like, and also you're going to get put on a list because they're going to be using facial recognition software like they did in protests that I mobilized in 2019. And they're going to figure out who you are. All right. So one of the things that people really need to be thoughtful about right now is what can you do where you live, right? What can you do where you live? And, there are other forms of disruption. I'm just going to point out, Nick Fuentes, who last week was doing all this like your body, my choice stuff, had his house doxxed by feminist activists this weekend, and all sorts of things went down. All right. So like there are ways to make it really uncomfortable for the fascists to carry out their plans, but your activity in relation to that is going to have to be local. It's going to have to be local. And I do want to say this, right? Like, if you missed the mass mobilization call last week on Thursday night that involved Indivisible and Working Families Party and the SEIU and all sorts of other educators, all sorts of other folks who are longtime mobilizers, please go to the Working Families page on YouTube and watch the call. It's long. It's like 2.5 hours. But it will give you a sense of like where the best mobilization practices lie right now. And I want everyone to get prepared, okay? Because we're not there yet, right? Like, we're not, this is a really important thing. I know we're all really scared about what's coming, okay? But we're not there yet. And what we need to do is maximize this window of opportunity, all right? Maximize this window of opportunity, all right? And I'm also just going to say one other thing, okay? I want people to be very thoughtful about where you are donating money right now. All right, because we're going to need local resources, okay? Food banks, right? Maybe medical clinics, okay? No, we don't need to be donating money right now to the Democratic National Committee, okay? They're okay. They've got money in the bank, all right? What we need to be doing is thinking about what we're going to do locally, like locally where we live, okay? In the idea that if we can build community where we live, and those communities can work together, right? Through mass mobilization, there will be things that we can do collectively, but also we will be engaged where we live, which honestly is really like the thing that matters the most right now. So in any event, I went on a tangent. Our program, the Dual Power Accelerator, is going to train you how to do all of this. And I would really like to see as many of you join us as possible. There are, like I said, there are scholarships available. It's a 10-week training program. It starts on the 27th of November and it runs until the 27th of January. All right. And it's really, and that's even just going to be our final wrap-up call. So by the time we get to the inaugural, you guys are going to have a really good roadmap. So please consider joining us. We have a great group of people who have already joined, and I hope you'll consider it. Okay. All right, let me just go back to a couple of other things that I just want to talk about right now, because we have this situation happening right now in the Democratic Party that is fundamentally a bit of a circular firing squad, okay? And it's actually happening among progressive activists and others, right? There's a lot of people running around out there who are saying things like, it's all the fault of Kamala for not talking to white men. Well, she did talk to white men, right? It's all the fault of the Democratic Party for not talking to the working poor. Well, they did, right? It's all the fault of X, Y, and Z decision that got made, right? And I just have to say something, like, if you accept the fact that a huge portion of our population has been subject to direct disinformation targeting, okay? If you accept the fact that there are information bubbles out of which people who are leaning Trump cannot escape, okay? There's literally nothing that Kamala Harris could have done differently that would have burst that, all right? And we're going to have time to analyze like how it could have happened differently, all right? But like, this is my point right now. Blaming people who did the best they could on the Harris campaign, blaming Democrats who were out there mobilizing like nobody's business, right? Blaming people who, you know, with the best of intentions and with all available information from people on the ground, thought this was going to go a different way, is not productive right now, okay? It's not productive. And I want people to understand that, like, there is spiraling and then there is action. And it doesn't mean that there's not a window of time right now where there's an incredible need for grieving. It doesn't mean that there's not a desperate need right now for people to feel everything, right? You know, like I think most of you probably saw on Threads that I actually went to church yesterday for the first time in my adult life. Like, granted, it's a non-denominational, very progressive church. There was literally, the word God wasn't mentioned once. But, you know, one of the things that was important about being there and being there with my kids was that it was like a mass grieving event. Like, there was sobbing in the congregation, hundreds of people, men, women, non-binary people, trans people, people of all racial identities, people of all economic strata. It was like it was a mass lament. Okay. And there is a true need to feel that right now. Okay. Because we need to process the loss. All right. And this is the really important point, we cannot allow ourselves to lament and spiral and conspiracy theorize and expect someone to come and save us right now. All right. Because that's not going to happen, at least not based on what we know right now. All right. What we have to do is get organized. Like, get organized. Like, give yourself the time to process, but then you got to get back up off your knees and start getting to work. All right. And some of us will be more ready for that than others. Some of us may be more able to do that than others. Right. I mean, I know I've heard from some folks in this audience who are like, I'm 80 years old and I can't do any more mobilization. Fine. You still need to get connected with people in your own community so that when and if you need help, you are networked in to get it. Right. And so I think there's just a huge need right now for people to process and then decide that we actually have more power than we're giving ourselves credit for right now. All right. And I mean, again, you're going to hear me say this a lot in the coming months. 71 million people is not nothing. 71 million people versus 74 million people who voted for him is not nothing. It's not nothing. The House isn't called yet. If it goes for the Republicans, it's going to be by the tiniest fractions of a margin. And we all saw how that worked in the last House of Representatives, right? It does not mean that everything is going to be railroaded and work exactly as the Trump administration wants it to. And I'm going to remind you, he's profoundly incompetent, even though he has surrounded himself now with ideologues again, and the guardrails are a little bit weaker. They're not gone completely. All right. And so it's important also to make sure that you do not allow yourself to doom spiral into the idea that it's all over, that there's never going to be another election, that there's not any way to push back, and that all hope is lost. All right. Because that, by the way, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but I have to make it really clear, that right there is rolling over for fascism, right? That's laying down and giving up. And that, I hope, is not what we do in this community, right? It certainly isn't something that I've been trying to convey here for the last 8 years. Okay. All right. So let's just talk for a second about, I kind of want to do the bad news first, about the appointments that are coming out of what's being projected right now from Trump. Okay. So he has appointed Tom Homan as his border czar. This is very, very, very bad. If you've seen the 60 Minutes interview with Tom Homan, you know that he believes in family separation. He also believes that if you're going to deport people and you don't want to separate families, you should just deport everyone, whether they're American citizens or not. Okay. So for those who have sent me articles saying it's not going to be that easy for them to round up 11 million people, well, it kind of depends on whether or not they're just going to round up brown people and stick them on planes. Because it sounds like, given that it's Tom Homan, they're actually not going to make any distinguishing, determinations about whether or not someone actually is a lawful American citizen. He is a really, really deeply evil person. And you all know that family separation was a huge cause that I mobilized around in 2019 and, 2018. And I know things about what happened inside those camps, of course, because of my own experience there in doing that work, not at the camps, but with people who I was mobilizing with. And I still don't have words for all of it. So I do want people to be very aware, okay, that they are taking actions to follow through. Stephen Miller is also going to be the deputy chief of staff in charge of national policy. That in and of itself is also terrifying because he's Goebbels, right? We know what he's going to do. And Elise Stefanik is going to be the ambassador to the United Nations. That's kind of a weird choice because the margin in the House is so slim, but her district is extremely red and very gerrymandered. And so I'm assuming that they've made an equation here that they think any special election is not going to get a Democrat in office. That, by the way, is going to be a place to mobilize upstate New York. Okay. Like, we have that coming. Okay. So none of this is good. And I don't want to pretend it is. All right. And also simultaneously, one of the great things about organizing in the community where you live is that we will have strategies to deal with this. And I also just want to say one other thing. When I talk about the guardrails not being completely gone, one of the things I'm talking about is governors. All right. Maura Healey in Massachusetts has already said she's not complying with any orders to round people up. Okay. Gavin Newsom's not doing it. Okay. We've heard Pritzker say, you come for anybody in my state, you're going to have to come through me first. And there is a Democratic Association of Governors, and those folks are very well organized. Tim Walz used to be the president. Okay. So there will be also at the state and local level pushback against some of this stuff. All right. And so please just be aware that, again, I'm saying all of this with a very clear eye of what they are threatening and what is coming down the pike, that, all is not lost and not everything is a given. And also, please remember that they are wildly incompetent generally, right? And they're going to need people to carry out what they're asking for without any pushback. And the DOD is already having conversations, as I've said 3 times now on this broadcast and on the Patreon call yesterday. They're already having conversations about how they're going to deal with illegal orders that are given to them. So, again, keep in mind that there is progress being made in some states, at least, to have serious pushback. All right. And, while Kathy Hochul has said that she's going to work with the administration, she's not going to help deport people. Right. Even Eric Adams, who's currently under indictment, has said he's not going to help deport people out of New York City. So, again, remember that like local organizing, state and local, is going to be really critical as we move forward. Okay. All right. So somebody asked, are we to blame? And I think I've answered that actually pretty well. I have to say one other thing here about this here, though. We do have to be really careful right now of wildfire spreading of theories around the election. And, this is one reason why every time I say to you guys something doesn't feel right, I also say wait for evidence, right? Because even when I trust my own gut about something and it's, granted, I made mistakes in this election like pretty much every other progressive commentator did. I usually am waiting for evidence before I kind of like decide that something is a given way or is not. All right. And I'm just going to say this. I think every person who was invested in this campaign gave their all. I feel like I left it all on the field. Okay. And I think many of you do too. I think many of you were out there canvassing and door knocking and talking to everybody that you knew. And, this community is full of people, right, who have done an insane amount of work in this election cycle. And I think the idea that we were hopeful and that we were seeing signs of hope and that we were seeing like joy and huge rallies and like lots of promising stuff. If, we lost by 2%. Okay. And so like, it's not like we made an error in doing that, right? It's not like we were like, quote unquote, wrong to mobilize on the basis of hope and possibility and motivate, like making sure that people were invested in a better future. All right. So I don't want anybody here to be blaming themselves or to be frankly, like blaming Democrats, when the reality is that we're up against an incredible disinformation machine that, by the way, is largely controlled by foreign actors who really wanted Trump in office so that they control things that happen in Europe and in NATO. And, it just can, please keep a perspective on this. All right. Don't do the thing of, like somehow we're to blame. All right. Because between the white supremacy, the violent racism, the hatred of Black women in this country, and the disinformation campaign that has been like very active, as we know, since 2015, we were really in an uphill battle, more of an uphill battle than we recognized. All right. And so it's important that we recognize that we gave it our all, but also to remember this: every bit of organizing that you did for this election is a basis to organize now where you live, right? The Democrats in your local neighborhood, the people who care, go talk to them. Go talk to them. Talk to them about like setting up a community circle so that like people who are in need where you live or who are scared where you live or who may at some point be in need of something that you might be able to connect them with to keep them alive are aware that you're there. All right. Okay. All right. So let's see what else. Somebody asked a question, this question about panic. And I do want to talk about this just for a second because this is like a trauma response, right? I have to remind you all rather that like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn are all panic responses, right? And they're all trauma responses. And this thing of, I can't stop panicking. I can't stop panicking. I can't stop panicking. It's all terrible. Everything's terrifying. I just want to curl up in a ball and hide, is a combination of freeze. And it's also a combination of kind of like, again, an addictive cycle to the panic. It's hypervigilance, right? It's this thing of like, if I can just anticipate every horrible thing that could happen, maybe I can stay safe, right? So one of the things that I just want to say is that if you know people who are in that place, there's a very solid chance that some of their own trauma history is being triggered by it. I had people come at me over the weekend on Threads about pushing people to move too fast. And I will say that, I get both sides of this, right? I understand very much how I've had my own moments, honestly, in the last 24 hours, even where like my prior trauma has been like, oh God, I can't even think about that. I can't think about that moment because it's being triggered by what's happening here. I did have to say to one of my kids last night, can we please just not talk about that particular event right now? Because I can't handle it on top of what we're living through with the election, right? And a lot of us are in that place, okay? A lot of us who have been, in abusive relationships, or who had a narcissistic parents, or who experienced, like gender and race-based violence, right? And like fundamentally, like most of the people in this country who are not like white, cis, het, able-bodied men, have experienced some form of like, honestly, like violent discrimination. And I get it all right? So if you have people in your life who are really stuck in that panic cycle, what I would just say, because I was asked to give my advice on this, right? Please make sure that you are telling them that you're there for them, right? That they are safe with you, okay? That you will help them to get grounded and to find safe space, all right? And also to remind them, because this is really important right now, okay? I said this yesterday on the Patreon feed. Again, I'm just going to repeat it. You have to deal with what's actually happening in your immediate environment and not the most horrible things that you imagine. My dad talked me down on this last Thursday, okay? That one of the reasons why we're panicking right now is because we don't know what's going to happen actually. We don't know that they're going to be able to follow through on all the stuff, but they're threatening it, right? And so our minds, as a coping mechanism, spiral out to try to figure out how to deal with all that, right? When the reality is that where we sit right now, right? Like where you are in your home watching this, if you are at home, you're safe. Right? I hope you're safe in your own home. Like some of us aren't, but hopefully you're safe, right? Like you're grounded in the same place probably where you watch this broadcast every day of the week, right? And we need to remind our bodies of that, because the trauma response is also somatic, right? So we've got to learn the kind of grounding practices that keep us, and there's going to our new course is going to have some of this in it as well. You're going to have to figure out how to manage your central nervous system and your somatic responses to stay grounded so that we can do the work. All right. And one of the things that means is you've got to figure out how to be present in your body to the current moment. All right. Like that means doing the 5 senses exercises, which we've talked about here a lot, but I should probably just go through this. It's like, these are actual trauma reactive anti-post-traumatic stress responses exercises that are given to people. You can do roller coaster breathing, where you breathe up and down your fingers like this, right? Calms your breathing. You can do breathing where your exhale is twice as long as your inhale. That sends a message to your central nervous system that you are safe, okay? You can also do the thing that really helps when people are in panic states, and you can offer this to your friends and family, of doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste, right? And you do that very slowly as a means of getting back into your body, all right? So there's a lot of different exercises around this, but we need to do our best right now to detach from the panic about what's coming and to stay grounded in the present, all right? Again, it's really hard. Like I said, my own father had to talk me down from this last Thursday, big time, right? And he was right to do it, right? He was right to say, like, any number of things could happen between now and January 20th. Any number of things could happen between now and the first 6 months of a new Trump presidency, right? Any number of things could happen, all right? We actually don't know the future. We have a lot of fear about it, but we don't know what it's going to look like right now, okay? So do your best to get grounded if you need that yourself, and share those practices with people around you, and promise them that you are the safe space. They're safe in your house. They're safe in your company. That if they need someone to bear witness to the things that they're the most afraid of, if you have the emotional space to do that, you can be that bucket. All right. Just really, really critical. Okay. To make sure that, again, this is part of community building and being in connection with people, right? That you provide that safe space. And if you need it, you seek it out. Okay. All right. Okay. People asked me what I think is going to happen with Trump sentencing. You know, I have to tell you guys, I hope that Judge Merchan is still going to sentence him. I think he's probably considering whether or not someone can serve a jail sentence while they're a sitting president. We've never had this situation before in American democracy. You all know that I think very highly of Judge Merchan as a judge. I think he was eminently fair throughout the entire trial, and truly did everything that he needed to do to preserve a guilty verdict. And no jurist in the history of America has ever been in this position. All right. I don't know what he's going to do. And I wish I had more of a kind of like insider gut check about it. All right. What I will say is that there's every reason to sentence Trump to prison and then allow Trump to battle it out in court, right? The thing to do would be, in my opinion, would be to sentence him for the crimes that he committed, that he was convicted of, and then let Trump try to make the argument that he shouldn't have to serve his time. And we'll see what happens with that. All right. I'm also just going to remind you that the DOJ has no control over the state cases. So even if Jack Smith's cases wind down or there's a report filed or he makes Trump battle it out in court, because he can do that too, the DOJ will be under the control of a new attorney general, assuming that Trump takes office. And so, my expectation is that those federal cases are going to vanish, and it sucks. Like it sucks. Okay. People asked about what Biden can do now. Okay. So I just have to point out a couple of things. There was some frustration on the Patreon feed this morning, a lot of Biden bashing, frankly. Why won't he pardon his son? Why won't he do this? Why won't he do that? So listen, one of the things that we have to remember here is that like democratic ideals, when all democratic ideals are eroded, what we have is nihilism. And that means people die. Okay. Like if you have situations where like democratic norms are not upheld, you're not living in a democracy, no matter who does it. Okay. And we don't want that kind of precedent set. All right. Now, Biden does have executive order power. Okay. He has a lot of power of what he can do with executive orders. The problem with the executive order power is that the moment that Trump gets into office, he can reverse all of it. Okay. And executive order power is limited to certain universes. He can't do things regarding the judiciary. He can't do things with regard to government funding. He can't pass legislation, right? He can do certain things by executive order, okay? We know that he is working to try to get an enormous final tranche of aid to Ukraine before he's out of office. That he can do, okay? He can declassify certain information related to Donald Trump. And frankly, one of the things that I hope he does is literally declassify everything related to any investigation into Donald Trump, because people deserve to know what the government knows about it, all right? And I think also we do need to have some kind of discussion. Rachel beat me to it, but of some kind of consequence in relation to the bomb threats that were made against particular voting sites that we know were tracked back to Russia. Rachel is pointing out, and I was going to point this out too, that Obama expelled diplomats after various forms of election interference in 2016 before he left office. And we need some form of action in that direction that says no, this is not okay, and we're not going to let it slide. So, we will have to see what he decides to do. I don't think that any of us need to spend any time advocating for that. Biden's going to do what he's going to do, and he's got good advisors around him who know what he can do and what he can't. I would love to see him forgive the rest of the student loans, Julie, but again, that's something that could be reversed almost immediately when Trump comes into office. And that's going to put a lot of people, granted, let me just say this, from a political messaging standpoint, Biden forgiving every single student loan and then Trump going no way, screw you, you're all on the hook, is a really bad thing for, the perceptions of Trump and the Republican Party. But all that said, it's still going to leave people in a position of threat, financial threat, right? So we'll have to see what he does, but I do think that, there's movement happening in this direction. Okay, final thought for today. This has been a very long broadcast, is about social media, because one of the things that I spent some time thinking about this weekend was oligarchy. Because, I like light topics when I'm supposed to be not working. I have to point out that, essentially right now, Elon Musk is running a shadow government, right? He's amplifying this idea that whoever's the Senate majority leader should be someone who's going to just push Trump's appointments through really fast. There's not going to be any delays. They've got to be committed to it. And the Republican senators are lining up to show fealty to that point. Okay. We also have, Elon Musk in charge of Twitter, X, whatever, which, by the way, you should abandon immediately because they changed their terms of service and the changes are gross. Seriously, get off it. I'm not even kidding. I don't care where you want to stay. I don't care what impact you should make. They're able to sue people now in bad Texas courts for saying things that they don't like. Get off the platform. Get off it. Don't mess around. Delete all your tweets. Go to Tweet Deleter or one of those services. Lock your account and leave. It's over. You should get out. Seriously. But we also then have Zuckerberg over here, right? With Facebook and WhatsApp and Threads and Instagram. Okay. And he's already bent the knee to Donald Trump also. And, one of the things we have to think about here is that, like, as disinformation grows, because I'm going to tell you one thing about like dictatorships is that like they need disinformation to function and stay in power. And if we're looking at things like Viktor Orban and what he did to the national press and how he's controlled information as a model, you should expect that the algorithms are going to be even further weaponized to prevent you from finding out the truth. All right. So, I am, obviously, as you all know, have a huge account on Threads and have spent a lot of time there since I left Twitter in December of 2022. Blue Sky is an interesting model now. And I know I've talked smack about Blue Sky before here, but I just want to say something to everyone about it. Okay. It is open sourced. Okay. Which means that the code is not controlled by any one person or any group of people. Jack Dorsey is no longer on the board. And it is also a certified public benefit corporation, which requires it to act in the public good. All right. There is no algorithm on Blue Sky, which is fascinating, right? So there's no way to game it, which is really good for grifters and people who are creating clickbait and outrage to kind of keep you engaged. Those folks are not going to succeed on Blue Sky, all right? And also, there's no censoring of political content, okay? And you all know that I have had big problems on Threads. This is why we tried to do my live chat on Substack on election night. That got shut down early because everybody was so upset. One of the reasons why I didn't do that on Threads is because they kept putting me in jail every time I was live chatting about a particular political event. There is nothing like that on Blue Sky. They have moderators, but that's it. So I am considering, I'm spending more time on Blue Sky this morning. I spent some time evaluating this over the weekend. And I think I'm watching also a big migration of of major political commentators into Blue Sky, even if they're also staying on Threads simultaneously. Like George Conway, for instance, has moved a lot of his content over to Blue Sky in the last few days. I think part of that is because there are real concerns now, not just about political safety, okay, but also about where we're actually going to be able to speak so that we're heard, and where do we think the platform is that is least likely to be under the thumb of the Trump administration once it comes into office. So I would just think about it, right? Like, you can open up an account on Blue Sky. You can follow me over there if you want to. I mean, I have 3,000 followers over there right now. It's not anything huge, but I do want people to consider whether or not they want to be a part of the data manipulation and information manipulation game, because it's going to get worse. And so I care about you guys, and I want to protect you, and I want to make sure that you're in safe spaces. And I'm just giving all of that a lot of thought. Right now, I am like chewing gum and walking at the same time between Threads and Blue Sky. But I also see the point now of maybe migrating more to Blue Sky before January 20th. So consider it. Just consider it. Not Blue Sky instead of YouTube. I'm still here. No, I'm talking about print social media. This broadcast is going to live on YouTube. And it's not going anywhere, and Patreon. So that's not going anywhere. And my Substack is still going to be my Substack. I have a lot of, things going on because I like to write and I like to broadcast. So there will be other spaces where you will find me. But for those who like to follow me on social media, it's going to be Threads and Blue Sky right now. That's it. Okay. All right. So that's it for today. This was a very long broadcast. I love you guys. I know so many of you are suffering and struggling and really angry and full of grief and panic. And I just want you to know, I get it. I've run the whole gamut of the emotional responses over the last few days. I was so exhausted yesterday after the service I went to, where everybody was just sobbing their guts out. I was watching wives just lose it, husbands lose it, parents of small children lose it. I mean, it's so hard. And also, I want you all to give yourselves that space and then remember that we've got to get back up. We really don't have a choice right now, because we have an obligation to humanity and to one another to do what we need to do where we live. So please consider joining the program again. It is the Dual Power Accelerator. You can find it at GaiaLeadership Project.com/dual-power-accelerator. And I will also make sure I put a link here and somewhere so you guys can find it. And it's also in the box below this broadcast if you want to sign up. And I will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. All right. Take care, everybody. Love you guys. Hang in there. Take care of yourselves. Please nurture yourselves. Take care of your bodies. Don't forget about that. Sleep, eat, drink water, exercise, go for a walk, get out in the sunshine, get some vitamin D. Okay. We need to stay healthy right now on top of everything else. All right. I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye.